Okay. So my name is Brittany Newberry, and I am interviewing Branden Peters, BrandenPeters, for Georgia State University's Atlanta Hip Hop Oral History Project on July 20th, 2023 in Atlanta, Georgia. You are aware that we are sharing this interview, putting it online, and making it available to researchers, students, and others across the globe.
Yes.
Awesome. So the first question I have for you is to describe your family background, the year you were born, the place you were born, and then get into like your siblings, parents, grandparents.
Okay. As far as like the names, where they're from, or like
whatever you want to share.
Okay. All right. My name is Branden Peters, born in Inglewood, California in 1976. Son of Rudolph and Edna Peters. You know, from California for the most part. My family, their parents originated from Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. My mother grew up in LA, well, Compton and Watts specifically. My dad grew up in Oakland, and very tight-knit family. I'm an only child technically, but my family is humongous, so I always grew up with cousins that were like brothers and sisters to me. And you know, pretty good upbringing. Spent most of my time in the Bay Area in LA, and there definitely enjoyed it.
So where did you attend school?
Which school? Elementary, college,
grade school through college.
Okay. I attended school really all over the Bay. I attended school in Oakland. I attended school in San Leandro. I attended school in Vacaville. Went to Payne College in Augusta, Georgia, and transferred to Clark Atlanta University, where I graduated.
What was the experience at Clark Atlanta like?
My experience at Clark Atlanta was a great one. It was a lot of people from the Bay Area there, so I felt comfortable. Also, a lot of people from LA, but being around black folks from different backgrounds, different walks of life was awesome. And also because this is before everybody had a whole music store and a library and a studio and everything on their phone, so you actually had to interact with people and learn. So discovering different music, discovering people loved go-go from DC, and discovering, people loved techno from Detroit, house from Chicago. Discovering that people outside of where I grew up also listened to the music that I grew up on, the E40s, the Mac Malls, things that were what we considered not to be super national, but discovering, people from Detroit like this too, people from Kansas City like this too. It was very eye-opening, showing that how small the world really is. And then just meeting people that, came from different backgrounds socioeconomically was definitely a change for me. But most of the people that I knew that were black, that drove certain kind of cars and things like that, probably didn't get them 100% by legal means. So it was interesting to see, parents dropping their kids off to college in Range Rovers and Rolls Royces and all that stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, this is impressive. You know what I mean? To the point where my roommate in college, his dad, Dr. Satcher, was actually running the CDC when we were roommates, and then was actually under in consideration for being the Surgeon General of the United States while we were in school. And I was very close and still am very close with him and his family. So that was just awesome to see. For a kid from where I'm from, like, I never thought I would, be in proximity to folks that were doing things like that for a living.
Yeah. So what were your personal aspirations?
Going to college, my aspirations were to graduate, for one. I really didn't have a choice of whether I was going to college or not. My parents, that was just something they instilled in me, for sure. And I didn't know what my major was going to be going into Clark, Atlanta, a good friend of mine by the name of Marcus Thompson, who was also from Oakland, kind of pushed me into helping him write stuff for the paper because he was overwhelmed with all the stuff he had to write, and that turned into a career. I had no intention whatsoever to be a journalist, anything like that, really to write. Like when I decided my major was mass media arts, I really wanted to be a sportscaster. I'm heavily into sports and did a lot of sports coverage and things like that in college, and interned at ESPN, interned at our local ABC affiliate in San Francisco. And at that time, you had to be in a very small market to start off your career, and I'm not a small market type of person. I don't really like little bitty cities to live in. So I decided to work behind the scenes, and a lot of that instruction came from Clark Atlanta University in the Mass Media Arts Department.
So can you describe some influential figures or events throughout your life that like influence your career? Whenever, like childhood, college. Like.
I mean, that's a super long list. Gotta narrow that down.
Okay, so can we start with let's start with college. Like, who inspired you during college, or what events inspired you? Because what years did you go to college?
I graduated in '99. I started in '94. So for me, honestly, a lot of my peers really provided inspiration for me in college, because we were hustlers, like literally, and I mean that in a positive sense. We were really like go-getters. The motto for Clark Atlanta is find a way or make one. We took that to heart, and most of us came with that initiative before we even got there. So, there are several people that I know now who I matriculated with who were doing great things then, are doing great things now, to the point where they pushed me to never say no, to always push forward. So my peers, for sure, it's way too many to name. I would say as far as instructors, so I'm trying to remember, I'm horrible with names. I would say Brian Jenkins was definitely a professor who was very hard on us, but taught us how to edit, taught us how to shoot, taught us how to be professional, all of those things. Super talented dude, has edited, technical directed for the Olympics, all kind of stuff. He was definitely one of those figures. And I'm so bad with names. I had a few teachers that were like really pivotal that I still remember some of the things that they taught me back then in classes, which is amazing to even think then. Obviously, kind of not an instructor, but like I mentioned Dr. David Satcher before, for sure an inspiration. Like just seeing like, okay, this person has achieved so much, been president of a university, head of Central Center for Disease Control, Surgeon General, but was like a super regular person. Like very nice, very accommodating, treated us with respect, all of that. Like, so that was very impressive for me. Like I said, my boy Marcus Thompson, he's a year younger than me, but I always say that to me, he kind of mentors me to an extent, because he's known since high school, he knew he wanted to be a writer, and literally never veered from that path, and has accomplished so many things in his career now. So he was one. It's a ton. Like I'm one of those people that I can draw inspiration for pretty much anything genuine.
Okay. So, as you said, you attended college between 1994 and 1999. Yes. Were there any events that affected you during that time and still affect you now?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if affect is the right word, but they're memorable events for sure. Just seeing what the positive sides of what Freaknik was. Like, it's ironic because obviously people think of college kids just wilding out in the streets during Freaknik, but one of my number one memories from Freaknik is music. Like the songs that I heard. and meeting people from all across the country, for sure. Going down to Daytona to Black Beach weekend with my friends, being broke as hell, 8 people in a one hotel room. It's just having a good time. And then just things that aren't like well known, but I remember there was a spot on campus called Audrey's Music Room. And I remember it had to be 1998 that they were shooting an episode of Rap City there with Jay-Z and Dame Dash. And I remember this is during the height of Hard Knock Life, like pretty much kind of the peak of his musical career. And both of them driving up, one in a white limo, one in a black limo, to Audrey's Music Room. And I was like, there's no way in the world that Jay is gonna come on campus and none of us are going to get an interview. So I literally went and found a cameraman, found a camera before BET set up, sat down in between them and just started asking questions. Didn't ask for permission for an interview, didn't anything. Like, that's find a way or make one. Mm-hmm. Those are the things. And just really like working extremely hard then, so I didn't have to work hard later. I speak at schools kind of regularly, and I always tell them, like, oh, there was a year where I had work study, a part-time job, was, I believe, the music editor for the newspaper, the sports anchor for CAU News, did a football recap show during the season, a weekly football recap show, and I carried a full load. And had a girlfriend on top of that, so a lot of work. And there were times that I would literally go into the mass media arts department before the sun came up and leave after the sun had gone down. And that was a regular occurrence. So it's just, it's just working hard and busting my ass. Then, I mean, that's just what we did. Like, it was like, this is what I wanted, so I went after it. So all those things are memorable. On a music level, there was a event that they would have at Morehouse in Spelman called Underground Live that they would have once a month, and we would go. And at that time, I was rapping, me and a lot of my friends, so like we would go and freestyle and all kind of stuff. And it's funny because I've asked a few times on social media, does anybody have footage of this stuff? Because there were always cameras there, mm-hmm. but I've never seen any footage from it. But it was like literally all college students, and at some point it got out to the neighborhood, so people that weren't even college students would come. Sometimes it was just a DJ, sometimes it was a band, and people would go up there, do poetry, they would sing, they would rap, they would do songs that they had created, they would freestyle. Like, all of those things have lasting memories for me.
So you said you were a rapper during this time?
Yeah.
So when did that start, and how long did it go on for?
I mean, I've only recorded like 2 or 3 real songs, but I still have notebooks and stuff. Like, people come up to me like at homecoming and stuff like, man, I would have thought you had albums out by now, and I just lost the passion for it at some point. But yeah, like, we started rapping in high school. Me and my cousin Jeremy, rest in peace. And the ironic thing is, most people will not believe this, but he had drawn a logo and everything, and the name of our group was Outkast. Before we had heard of Outkast, I won't say until Outkast exists. I remember watching, I believe the name of the show was Video LP with Madeline Woods, and they played the video for Players Ball when it was just a song on LaFace's Christmas album. We were both watching it like, I can't believe this. It's another group with our name. And that was when in hip hop you couldn't bite. Like, you can't, it doesn't matter who came first. If they're out, then you gotta switch it up. And that's happened a lot in history. Most people don't know, like, Digital Underground was like a Public Enemy type group, and then Public Enemy came out and they had to switch their whole thing.
So what did your name become once you heard about that?
I don't even remember. This was so long ago. I don't even remember what we switched it up to, but yeah, it was cool. Like, we recorded a song or two, and then I got to college and had a whole other crew, and we recorded some songs and all of that stuff. It was interesting. We actually my man at that time, I seen Aziz, who his brother Siraj actually plays on a whole bunch of different instruments on a ton of different albums. We did I don't know if you remember The Real World, that show. So Tech from The Real World went to Morris Brown. Him and Jamal, who Jamal actually has a movie out now that he directed and produced. They did like a short film, and we did a song and a video for the short film and all of that stuff. So it was fun, man. Like we were definitely creatives in every sense of the word.
Wow. What artist inspired your style?
I was always into lyrics. So like my friends, when I was in high school, like everybody listened to the stuff that was local. And I did too. Like I listened to, the E40 and the Click, Mac Mall, Selly Cell, all of that stuff. But I was heavily into lyrics. So like I was the first person in my crew that discovered Source Magazine and brought it back, and showed everybody that. I would listen to obviously Too Short, NWA, everything, but like I also was heavy in the Gangstar. I loved Master Ace, loved Public Enemy, X Clan, KRS-One, like, so again, biting was not a thing then. So it's like I purposefully did everything I could do to not sound like anyone else. You know what I mean? So for me, I just wanted to sound like me. Obviously, you're always inspired, but I know for a fact that if I was writing something and it sounded like, to me, it sounded like somebody else, I would scratch it out and pivot and write something else.
Okay. So were your lyrics at all political, cultural, historical?
Yeah, I'm from Oakland, so like, I don't know if you know anything about Oakland, but it's very much like Black nationalism. I always say Oakland is an equal mix of blue collar work, Black nationalism, and street stuff. Like, you know what I mean? So definitely that. I've never been somebody that wrote or pretended to be somebody I wasn't, so it wasn't a bunch of gangster shit or nothing like that in there. Like, obviously seen a lot of family members and, have done things or whatever, but that's not me. I'm not a street person at all. Like, I'm street smart, I'm savvy, but I've never participated at that level in illegal things. So it was very much like braggadocious rap, some social stuff, some political stuff. But yeah, it was me, my personality on a higher level.
So how did the city of Atlanta influence you during your time at college?
The city of Atlanta influenced me in college in many ways because I was here. And it took me a while to get used to being here because it's so different from where I'm from. Just people are way more chill. I remember I always say this. I was walking in Kroger one day. I was either a freshman or a sophomore, and this older Black lady came up to me and she said, "Baby, I don't know where you from, but out here, when we speak, you speak as well." And I said, "Yes, ma'am," and I kept it pushing. And that was 20 plus years ago. I always remember that because, that's just not like my acknowledgement. I'm home at that age is to see I see you, not to greet you as a friend or a foe. It's just like, oh, okay, what's up? I see you, like, and we keep it pushing. But it was just a little different here, I guess, like Southern hospitality or whatever. So that camaraderie, that strong family nature, even with strangers. Definitely influenced me to let down my guard to an extent and just chill out. I remember being super uncomfortable in college going to parties and there was no one patting you down or you didn't walk through a metal detector, which sounds insane, but that's just what it was. Like I was because I'm like, anybody could have anything in here. Like I've seen a lot. Like I've been at parties where people got shot. Been at parties where with big fights, like it happens, and this is all before 17. Like, so coming out here, I was just like, yo, what you mean? Like, there's nobody winding, where's security? Like, ain't nobody, you know what I mean? Like, anything could happen up in here. But then I was like, oh, people come here, they come to parties to party and have a good time and dance. And I was like, oh, okay, I can get with that. So let me figure it out. So yeah, it definitely influenced me in that way. And just like I said, just the education system of being in the AUC and having people from all walks of life that all look like me in one place, and all of us are, most of us are striving to learn and get our degrees. It definitely influenced me to this day. Like, I'm very proud of my alma mater. I represent it everywhere I go, and still super tight with a lot of people I went to school with. From a music level, I was a fan of like the Dungeon Family before I even came to school here. What was I found out later from having discussions with various members and becoming tight with certain members is they were super influenced by what we were doing in the Bay. And the Bay was like their second biggest market outside of Atlanta. Like, I remember going to, before Hot 97 in New York had Summer Jam, before Birthday Bash, all this stuff, KMEL, which is the first FM hip hop radio station in the world in San Francisco, had Summer Jam, and it was 2 days. And it was like the thing to do for us as kids. And I remember going, and they had Outkast performing like super early. Like, these are like 9-10 hour concerts, and they had them performing like they might have been the third act. And I had heard no one, it was me and my homeboy Jarvis were the only people I knew who were really listening to their album. I'd never heard it in the streets, I never heard it at parties, never heard it, none of that. And I promise you, everyone who was in their seats there was singing everywhere. And I was just like, so if you're closet fans, this is crazy. Like, I was like, I swear to you, like, none of my friends, other than one homeboy, was into them like that. So I was already listening to the music. It just resonated with me even more, because there was to me, like, I consider music, when it's done the right way, to be spiritual, somewhat of a spiritual connection. Like, as soon as I heard Dre and Big, and especially Goody Mob, because like I said, I'm Public Enemy, X-Clan, but this was more of it was just a different take on the same thing. Like, Goody Mob often talks about how Busta gave them a copy of Behold a Pale White Horse, and how it influenced cell therapy. So, you know, it's all secular, but to me, I was just like, oh wow. So being here, like, oh, a couple years ago in Headland and Delow, like, I ended up living in East Point years later, like, oh, this is what they was talking about. Or talking about like the only bus headed to Decay, oh, that's what they was talking about. So it takes it from being art to being reality. So it even resonated with me even more at that point. So it's so many ways. I believe that, and from a cultural level, the things that happen here in Atlanta influence people worldwide, whether they know it or not. And I'm just happy to have been a part of it, and in some ways a major part of it. I'm sure we'll get into that later. But yeah, I think it's still influential. I feel like, thankfully, Atlanta has influenced me in a lot of ways and impacted me in a lot of ways, and I've been blessed to be able to tell those stories and influence the city in certain ways through my own art.
Awesome. So, where was your first job after college?
So this is the funny thing. I went to school to get an education, but I really went to school to get a job. So I was working thanks to Reggie Mitchell, and I cannot remember this other brother's name, but they were very serious about us learning the craft and getting work. So, and one of my homeboys who plugged me into, Derek Lawrence from Brooklyn, who was my roommate and all of that stuff in college and after college a little bit. So I started working before I graduated from college. So I started doing like master control stuff at WPBA, like part-time or whatever. I don't remember who hooked me up with it. It was another professor at Clark. Because this is a dope thing. Like the professors that were still working in the business always made sure that we were good, which is, you know, something I don't see a lot. Because a lot of times people that teach ain't did what they doing professionally in 20, 30 years. And you can't really do that in journalism and TV because things change rapidly. So that was my first job. Then my man Derek was working. He worked at PBA too. Then he started working for the Braves and doing audio support at the stadium. And he hooked me up over there. And matter of fact, I got a lot to thank Derek for. So while we're there, Turner was hiring for more like behind the scenes quality master control stuff or whatever. And I'm just like, it ain't what I want to do, but it's a check. So they ended up hiring me temporarily at TBS, and then they were launching Boomerang, which is a derivative of Cartoon Network, and they hired me full-time to do that. And the funny thing about it, and most of this is before I graduated from college. The funny thing about that is, who we know is Tyrese K, but the world knows is DJ Drama. His first job out of school was at Turner too, and we would be walking through the hallways like, man, I can't wait to get out of here. This is not what I want to do at all. But, you know, obviously it worked out tremendously.
Yeah. So after Turner, what did you do?
After Turner, I took a job at a now defunct television network called Tech TV in San Francisco. Did that for a little over a year, and unfortunately during that time 9/11 happened. So I was a SAP producer for an 8-hour thing we call Tech News, which basically we covered all news that had anything to do with technology and also dug deep into the story. So at that time it's a lot of Napster, you know, that whole lawsuit and all of that, and it's all cool and all that stuff, and then the plane hit the building and shit hit the fan, you know what I mean? So that was insane working in news at that time, like while most people were just like freaking out, I was just like called like, hey, if the bridge is open, I'm on my way in, because I was living back in the Bay then, like right outside of Oakland, a city called San Leandro. And it was crazy at the time. I was dating a young lady that lived in New York, and she was supposed to be at the towers that day to present something. And the super ironic thing is, because most people forget, Aaliyah died a week before 9/11. And I remember, this was two-way pagers, I'm aging myself. I remember we were at Jimmy's Bronx Cafe watching a comedy show, and it's so crazy how things come full circle. We went because at the time, Lil Duval, when nobody knew him, he went to Morris Brown, and we had the same barber, and I just knew he was hilarious. And it's like 2 years later, I was like, bro, you need to do comedy. Like, you're tripping. Like, you are hilarious. And Cedric the Entertainer took him under his wing, and I happened to be in New York when he was performing at Jimmy's Bronx Cafe. And we went to check him out, and I went to go support. And I forgot my two-way. I go back, and I got a million messages saying Aaliyah had passed. I'm like, yeah, this is insane. And like a day or two later, I think she passed on a Saturday or Sunday, but whatever that Monday was, I flew on US Airways from EWR to SFO, one of the routes. That was one of the planes that hit the tower, like literally 7 days before. Insane. So yeah, that was my job, and literally, like, I woke up that morning, I lived 20 miles door to door from the studio to my crib, exactly 20 miles on the dot. On a good day in traffic, it's gonna take me an hour. It took me 15 minutes to get to work that day because no one was out. There were, I don't know if you're familiar with the route from Oakland to San Francisco, but when you cross the bridge, Treasure Island is in the middle. There were military people with M16s out at the entrances and the exits, not allowing anybody on or off. Drive across that, and there are warships in the bay. Like, it's like a movie. And I drive in, and I'm there for, I think it was there, I worked for like 14 hours that day. Like while everybody's freaking out, I'm just like on the phone with the FBI, like booking satellite time for this guy, satellite time for this guy. Like, we're getting the information in, like it was just nonstop. And so that was my job for like a year. Ended up, because of 9/11 and economies crashing and all that stuff, ended up getting laid off, and that really started my career for real in writing. Because at that point, I was just doing behind the scenes stuff in TV and writing on the side, just to keep my skills sharp or whatever. My plan was I wanted to get on television, but I wanted to do it in my way, and I wasn't going to work in not even a secondary market. They wanted you to go to like towns that got 5,000 people. Like, I can't do that. Like, I'm a little too pro-black and aggressive for that. I can't.
So, did you start by writing freelance, or did you start working?
Yeah, so, well, it's been so long. I believe so. I believe I started by writing freelance. I can tell you the two entities that really helped me out. I will say this, even though, you know, a lot of people have things to say about them because of business practices and things of that nature, but a magazine or a paper that started here that at one point was distributed in a bunch of different places. I'm not sure if it still is. Like, a lot of us got our start at was Rolling Out. So shout out to Rolling Out for providing a platform for young journalists to cut their teeth, for sure. So I was doing stuff for them, but there was also a magazine out of, what city? They were like San Leandro, San Lorenzo, but in the Bay Area, called Showcase Magazine, that pretty much laid the blueprint for Ozone and Juice and a lot of these other magazines that were independent magazines that covered hip hop and black culture, but also were like business vehicles for, you know, promotions for these labels or whatever. So Frank Herrera, may he rest in peace, was a Latin cat from the Bay who started Showcase Magazine. Super cool. And I just happened to see it one day, and I was like, oh, let me call up there. I don't even know if I called her. I just saw the address and went up to the office and was like, hey, graduated from Clark, these are my clips, like, I want to write for y'all. I ended up doing a ton of stuff for them over time, which helped me sharpen my chops, actually introduced me to it, because I've been going to college for a minute, so like it was a lot of people in the Bay that I really didn't know like that were artists who had popped off over those like 4 or 5 years. So met a lot of them, created a lot of relationships, and just started freelancing for some of everybody, like freelance for The Source, freelance for rap pages. There was another magazine out of LA, I cannot remember the name, Rhyme, R-I-M-E. Freelanced a lot for them. I actually wrote a cover story on Ludacris for them. Yeah, so like a ton of different magazines, and at some point websites that I wrote a lot for over the years. I was just covering whatever, concerts, album reviews, feature stories, whatever. It was income, and it was something to help me get better.
So what have you found most challenging about your career, and why?
Good question. I believe what I found most challenging in my career is being who I am and navigating politics. I don't pretend, I don't know how to fake, I don't know how to be anybody that I'm not. I'm pretty much kind of I know what I bring to the table. I'm excellent at what I do. And if that's not enough, then this probably isn't going to work out. So I've always been the person that fights for proper compensation. I've always been the person that fights for proper title. And that's just always what it'll be. I don't know how to play the games. I don't do any of that. So that's been the biggest challenge, but it's also been, you know, a positive as well. I can't remember who it was that told me this. I don't even know if I heard it directly or read it or saw it somewhere, but the bottom line was always be who you are, because when whatever hits the fan, it's gonna come out anyway. So just be who you are at all times.
Yeah. Can you describe some of the issues that have come up with that challenge of being who you are?
Sure. I'll give a positive and a negative. When I was at Turner, and like I said, I was a contractor, making, obviously contractors make more money. They don't have to pay for, they don't have to match 401ks or medical or any of that stuff. So when I took the full-time job, they told me that they would come back in 6 months and reevaluate everything. And because money was a concern, I was like, I'm taking a big pay cut or whatever. And we got to that point, and they tried to renege on their promise. I'm the youngest person there by far, and I fought for them to own up to their word and ended up getting a raise. But the messed up thing is, got a raise, and they were like, well, we hired you along with 5 other people, so we have to give them a raise as well, but don't tell them that this is how it came about. So it's just like, come on, man. Like, this is bogus. So these are people that don't like me because I'm like 10 years younger than them doing the same job, and I'm putting money in their pocket, but I can't say nothing. Like, that's crazy. So that was, I guess, a positive and a negative. And a negative, I was at a particular job. I won't say the name of the company, but I got hired to do like social media stuff or whatever for different brands or whatever. And they started like having me like write out strategy and all of these things. And I was like, you need to pay me for this. Like, this is not what you hired me for. And and it was super funny. I'll never forget this as long as I live. They fired me, but they gave me a check, and they had me sign off on some stuff because they knew they were wrong. But what I'll never forget is they said, we think that you are great at your job, but we do not think that you are a good leader, which was ironic because I've been told since I was probably in the 3rd or 4th grade that I was a natural born leader. So I was like, this is an excuse because you don't want to pay me what I'm worth, and you thought I was silly enough to sit up here and do executive level work for a middle management salary, and that's not going to happen.
Thank you. So what has been the most memorable story you've written, and why?
Oh, man. I will give you the most memorable and most impactful.
Okay.
The most memorable story I've written from my perspective, there is a artist from Vallejo, California, which is in the Bay Area, who passed 19 years ago by the name of Mac Dre. So Mac Dre it's an amazing story. Like, literally, he was an up-and-coming rapper who got pretty successful, and literally they weren't playing a lot of local music on the radio out there in prime time, and he had a song called Too Hard for the Radio that ended up getting regular radio rotation with the irony in that. So, poised to be like a breakout star, and like just natural charisma, he looks like a star. His friends were involved in a lot of robberies of banks and pizza parlors at the time, and they ended up going to jail. They offered, Mac Dre was like in a car with them. They hadn't even done a robbery. Like, he got hit with a conspiracy charge. Like, they figured out something was wrong and didn't do the robbery. And he ended up getting hit with a conspiracy charge, didn't snitch, did his time because he's like, these are my friends. Like, why would I tell them? Like, obviously I had nothing to do with this, but I'm definitely not going to roll over on them. And I released one album while he was in jail, like over the phone, but like literally came out of jail and completely reinvented himself and became like the hottest thing on the West Coast. Like, he had deals on the table, everything, and went to do a show in Kansas City. I don't know if a lot of people know, there's like a route that goes from California through other western states to the Midwest that all are heavy listeners of Bay Area rap. So Kansas City, Missouri is one of those places. So a lot of Bay Area rappers do shows there. And some things happened. He ended up getting murdered in Kansas City 19 years ago. So a year, I believe, after, maybe a year or two after he passed, I think it was just a year, I wrote a feature for my former employer, Double XL, on Dre and his legacy and everything. And at that time, like, he had his, like, there are people within that crew, like, they're all legit now, but at one point they were real street dudes, and that didn't do interviews. So through, a couple friends of mine, I was able to connect with them and talk to, his people, interviewed his mom, interviewed one of his first producers who does not do interviews, like, at all, and was able to put together a really dope feature. And it's funny because there's a spot that everybody used to go to in Oakland after the club and stuff called Chicken and Waffles, and I met a couple of the cats there to do the interview, and I mentioned in the story, and literally in a little glass thing as you're walking down the hall, like, that story is still there to this day. Like, they literally, like, cut it out of the magazine and put it up. So that was super memorable for me, just being, from where I'm from and growing up on Dre, and, being, there's so many, Bay Area, half of us are related. Like, there's so many ties to, like, my cousin went to prom with his best friend's sister and shit. Like, this is all kind of stuff. So it just meant a lot, because my thing is, if we don't tell our stories, they're either never going to be told or they're never going to be told correctly. And as one of the very few people that was not from New York that worked for any of these big magazines, like, shout out to, like, the people that's the generation that came before me, the Danielle Smiths, Black Cat, all of them who are from Oakland and ran Vibe, ran Source, all of that stuff. But in my generation, there was not really anybody at any of these publications that was from Oakland or even LA to an extent. So it was important for me to tell those stories. Even the same thing with the South. Like, I wrote a ton of stories on Southern artists, even though I'm not from here. I often say I've probably done more for Southern and Atlanta rappers than most people who from the South have done. So that was memorable. Impactful was the September 2003 Source magazine cover with the New South, which was Bone Crusher, David Banner, and Lil Jon on the cover burning a Confederate flag. And that was definitely the most impactful for my career, and probably most impactful from a cultural standpoint, because that introduced the world to what was happening down here. That, that wasn't a time where, radio was still kind of regional unless you had a bunch of money behind you. So that was one of those things that changed a lot, and that came about. I wrote, there's a website called Hip Hop DX, and I was traveling a lot during that time, and I was like, yo, it's like a lot of little scenes, like popping, like Houston is hot, Dallas is hot, like a lot of local rap scenes that are like popping, but like these are quality songs that don't sound just super regional. These are things that can blow up everywhere. And it was like, I went to Houston, when David Banner's a friend of mine, I went down there, he had a show, literally in probably 24 hours met Scarface, Bun, Slim Thug, ESG, Paul Wall, and Chameleonaire. Like, literally they take me, and Devin, the dude's manager, Rico, is from East Oakland. So like we didn't know each other then. He's been in Texas forever, but he was like, oh, you from the town? Like, I'm gonna show you around, I'm gonna take you here, there, whatever. So he takes me to the different clubs, all that stuff. So I'm literally getting introduced to their culture. And I was the first, they say, Paul and Chameleonaire, like, I'm the first person that ever wrote anything on them, period. Back in the day. So long story short, I pitched it to Hip Hop DX, and I'm like, yo, there's this scene, like, we should do it, just a joint on, like, these bubbling underground scenes. So that, they printed that, I don't even think I got paid for it. And I was like, all right, cool. So I had done a lot of stuff for The Source. Jerry Barrow, who's a legendary journalist, was one of the editors, and he really, like, looked out for me. Him and a guy named Gotti, who I don't think is in the business anymore, like, super looked out for me. And I pitched the story to them, and they kind of shaped it to what would make sense for the source. And little did I know, they had pitched it to Kim Osorio, who was the editor at the time, editor-in-chief at the time, as a cover story. I thought it was just going to be a feature. And, you know, the rest is history, man. Like, that changed everything. Because at that time, the source was a huge deal. Like, making the cover of the Source magazine is like an athlete making the cover of Sports Illustrated back in the day. Or young basketball player making the cover of Slam now. Like, that was a huge, huge deal.
Okay. So you've kind of touched on this, but I wanted to know, well, why do you write about hip-hop? You write about other things, but why write about hip-hop, and what do you like about it?
I write about hip-hop because this is my culture. It's what I grew up on. It's literally part of who I am. And I like, and I don't get to write as much as I used to, just because I just don't have the time. I have my hands on so many other things, but I try to do a few creative things a year. So, the example, like, I had so much fun, like Slam magazine is doing or by the time people see this, well, I've already done a top 50 basketball references in hip hop songs. So they asked me to write it and pick the songs and give my commentary on it and all that stuff. And it was super fun to me. Like, just researching lyrics, going like, oh, I forgot about this or whatever. It's just fun to me. Like, I still love hip hop. Like, I hate when, like, there's an age division in hip hop. Like, it really annoys me when older people are like, oh, I don't listen to this new stuff, where it's all mumble rap, or when young people be like, oh, they old, I don't listen. Like, I hate that. Like, I literally probably every Friday skim through whatever new music has come out. Doesn't matter who the artist is. Like, I'm gonna give it a shot. Like, I'm curious still. So it's literally part of my culture. Like, if it became illegal to listen to rap music tomorrow, like, I'd probably just move to another country. Or I'd just listen to it on the low. Like,
Yeah, I get that. So, in your opinion, how does Atlanta hip-hop compare to other regions?
it's interesting that you asked that, because with the internet and with the barrier for actually creating being the lowest that it's ever been, there isn't really a huge difference between hip hop in different areas. Like, a savvy ear can hear it, but there are rappers from LA that sound like Atlanta. There are rappers from Texas that sound like Atlanta. Like, if you listen to Travis Scott, unless you pick up on the references, you wouldn't know he was from Houston. You know what I mean? So I don't think there is a huge difference anymore. I think from a business or a marketing perspective, I believe that Atlanta is a little bit more savvy with presenting artists than a lot of other regions are, because I believe that there's more local support. And since all eyes are on Atlanta, if your song blows up down here, it's easier for it to stretch to other areas. Mm-hmm. And also there are more outlets. There's still a lot of open mics here. There's still a lot of DJs that are heavy in strip clubs that play the songs. That's like a marketing tool. There are multiple radio stations here. It's not just one or two black stations. There's probably 3 or 4 hip hop stations here. So there are outlets to do that, and it's something to do every night. So there are a bunch of arenas for songs to get played. But as far as the sound, everybody's trying to make a derivative of trap now. Like, I don't really hear a difference in the sound from place to place. It's just slang is a little different. The accent is a little different. But as far as flows and cadence and all of that stuff, a lot of it is the same. The only rappers that I hear coming out that are new, mm-hmm. that sound like where they're from, are Detroit rappers. And it's hard to tell because everybody's biting their flow and cadence. Like everybody's using Detroit flows, man.
So historically, when Atlanta hip hop was becoming a thing, did you see a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, like at that time you couldn't bite. It was crazy to sound like somebody else. Like you wouldn't be respected. You may get success on a mainstream level, but as far as hip hop is concerned, like you wouldn't really be respected if you sounded like somebody else. So Atlanta back then sounded like Atlanta, and I think Atlanta still does sound like Atlanta. It's just everybody else sound like Atlanta too. So it's there was a major difference. I believe that Atlanta artists to an extent had a chip on their shoulder, so they went a little harder with representing where they were from, which makes perfect sense. And also part of that is there are so many people that are not from Atlanta that claim Atlanta that it's like, all right, we need to differentiate between who, like, this is one thing you gotta super respect about the Migos. It's like they could have easily been like, I'm from zone, this is zone, that. Nah, they rep Gwinnett County. They represent North Atlanta, which was a completely different animal from the city. So, like you have to have a large amount of respect for just the authenticity in that, in my opinion. And even like some of the, not that first generation, not that Dungeon Family, not that Success and Effect, not the JD thing, because then like DF always sounded like Atlanta, but like Crisscross from Atlanta, they don't sound like Atlanta. They were a mainstream group, you know what I mean? So, and even like taking it back to like Dallas Austin and Highland Place Mobsters and all of that stuff, like early 90s, like they just sounded like music, you know what I mean? So it's one of those things to me, like there was the differentiation was that they went out of their way to represent, and also there's a musicality behind it because you have like Gene Carn, who I believe lived across the street from Gibb, or lived across the street from the Dungeon, who heavy in the music, been around for a long time, wrote a lot of stuff, sang a lot of stuff. Like that was an influence on them and their sound. And then you had, you know, Bobby Brown was down here initially, and that whole influence, and him running around Atlanta crazy. But you know, he owned the Dungeon, not the Dungeon, Stankonia before Stankonia, and even though he's not from here, the music, he did a lot of production there, the musicality of Jazzy Faye, with his dad being, you know, a member of the Barcades and all of that stuff. It's just, I believe that kind of seeped into the music as well. So it was a little bit, from a sonic perspective, it was a little bit more musicality to what artists were doing here in Atlanta in the early stages.
Thank you. So in your career, in what ways have you aimed to make a difference? Like,
so all I do is aim to make a difference, and whether it be a corporate gig, whether it be writing, or whatever, I'm all about making sure that people's names get mentioned and making sure that people have a shot. And if I have control of budget or have the power to put people on, I do the same thing. Like there are a ton of writers that I've been a part of giving opportunities to over time, ton of artists that I've covered and given opportunities to over time, or fought for them to give coverage. That's just what I do as part of who I am. I feel like if you are in a position, you're in it for a reason, and it's not just to benefit yourself, it's to benefit your people.
so you would say your background has a lot of impact on how you live your life?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So that was all the questions I have. You answered some of that. I asked.
I'm sure.
Are there any?
I've been doing this a long time.
Are there any other experiences that you would like to share?
As far as Atlanta and Southern hip hop is concerned, I think that there's so many people that have been a part of making this thing what it is. One thing I like to say, because I hear this a lot from outsiders. It's just like, oh, Atlanta scene is popping because they all work together and get along. You know, I'm like, that's not the case. Like we see it now with the whole Thug and Lucci thing and all of that. Like that stuff that's been going on for years. But I believe that the stakeholders here understand that there is a greater good. And to, if at all possible, keep the street stuff in the street and keep it out of the business. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand where I'm from, especially in LA. In New York to an extent, I don't really know the politics of Detroit like that, so I can't speak on that. But here, obviously, there'll be beefs or whatever. But I'll tell you, if some of the beefs that exist and have existed here, when other places, it would have been all over the blogs, it would have been all over the radio, people would have been making overt diss songs, all that stuff. That really didn't happen. Like literally a lot of that stuff was like happening in the street and didn't cross over to the records unless you had an extremely keen ear and you could hear the little subliminals or whatnot. I believe that Atlanta is winning and has continued to win because Atlanta and the South in general fought for so long to be respected in hip hop that once the ball got here, there was no way if possible they were trying to give it back. And even though I'm not from here, I gotta respect that because the music, at this point, we're talking like 20 years. Like the music, and not all these people that represent Atlanta are from Atlanta. Like Luda ain't from Atlanta, Jeezy ain't from Atlanta, whatever. Usher ain't from Atlanta, but they represent Atlanta, and most places wouldn't allow people to do that. So like, there's raps like Sweetie says she's from Oakland. You'll hear everybody be like, she ain't really from Oakland. Like it's just like just let she's representing our city and she's a star. Let her live. Like you know what I mean? Like. That doesn't really happen here. Like you don't really hear that here. It's very much, at least on the surface, it's very much like we're trying to win, and we want. If you winning, that means I'm winning, and I gotta respect that. Now, you know, no empire lasts forever, so who knows if things will change or whatever. But you have, you know, music business geniuses like Coach K here and things of that nature, and now you know 1 RPM that's doing a lot of things behind the scenes with artists. It's just like it keeps the evolution keeps coming, and it's dope and it's good for established artists and young artists because you can go to a show here and see acts that ain't had a hit in years, but everybody knows every single word and everybody's still turned up for it, and the show is sold out. Like. That's awesome to me. And I think that goes back to what I was saying, like people of a certain age come out to have a good time. Period. It ain't about being seen, it ain't about popping bottles, it ain't about standing on couches. Like all that stuff happens, but like literally there is a huge contingent of people here that just want to hear good music and come out and have a good time. And I think one of the other benefits here, and this is kind of like it's benefited New York back in the day, is like everyone comes here. So like you're literally reaping the benefits of talent from around the world in this city. Like you have a whole crop of brilliant kids coming out of colleges every year, and a lot of them decide to stay here. And that definitely helps as well.
Definitely. Well, if you don't have anything else, we're done. Thank you.
Not a problem. Not a problem at all.